wealthier, easier, and quicker. Good, thank you. So in contrasting them, most of us have heard, like my poor dad, very middle-class man, I mean, smart man, but he had middle-class ideas when it came to money and values. And he always said, son, our house is an asset, and it's our largest investment. And my rich dad would say, here, I'm 9 years old. I go, okay, I got it, Dad, I got it, right? And then I would go over to my rich dad's house, and I would say, my dad just said, our house is an asset and our largest investment. And my rich dad would say, well, that's why your old man's not rich, is because your house is not an asset, and if it's your largest investment, you're in really big trouble. And that's when the contrast that started to hit me. And then my poor dad always said, do you think money grows on trees? And his favorite words were, and I'd say, Dad, let's buy this. He goes, I can't afford it. And my rich dad said he forbade his son and I from ever saying the words, I can't afford it. He said, the moment you say you can't afford something, it becomes true. So the power of the spoken word or your thought has the ability to become what you think is real in the world. So if you say, I can't afford something, that becomes your real world or reality. And what my rich dad said instead was, instead of saying I can't afford it, simply say, how can I afford it? Or in school, a lot of times, I'd say, hey, Dad, guess what? I'm going to be a millionaire. He goes, you can't do that. And my rich dad said, never say you can't do something. Ask yourself, how can I do it? And he said, and just in the switching of those words, if you say, how can I afford it, your mind opens up to the possibility. And your mind then has to go to work. This is your single most powerful tool you have, is the brain. But if you say, I can't afford it, then the thing goes to sleep, and it sits there, goes dormant, and doesn't have to do any more work. You're the one who's doing the work then. So those are some of the subtle differences. My poor dad, the school teacher, the head of education, always said to me, he says, son, go to school, get good grades, get a safe, secure job, high-paying job, and work hard. And my rich dad said, that's a good idea if you want to work hard all your life. He says, but if you want to get rich, you have to learn how to have money work hard for you so you don't have to work for it. And you also have to learn to buy companies. Don't be the guy applying for the job, be the guy that's handing out. What I share to say to people is that there was 3 main points that I think made a difference in my life. And point number 1 is that I realized very early on in life money is a what? Idea. It's whatever you think it is. Now, when people say, well, how can I get more money? I say, well, just first change the way you think. Change your ideas. That's the good news. That's all you have to do. I realize when I talk to people about money, I'm slamming straight into their ideas. And a lot of times with money, there's several subjects you don't talk about at the dinner table: sex, religion, politics, and money, and whatever. And the reason for that is it's a very volatile subject. Whereas in my family, my poor dad, the school teacher family, was, I'm not interested in money. Money is not that important to me. I began to realize that was my poor dad's idea, was his attitude. Whereas my rich dad always said to me, money is power. Money gives you power. Respect it. Treat it respectfully. So there's all these different ideas about the subject of money. The thing I hear people say is, I'll never be rich. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, you see. And that's why money, just as an idea, is so, so powerful. And when I talk to people, I oftentimes ask them, I said, what did your parents tell you about the subject of money? Because that becomes real. If you were told, go to school and get a job, see, many of us may not be in the same profession, but we're following the same path. And most people did not come from families that were rich. In America, less than 1 out of 100 people at age 65 becomes rich. In the richest country in the world. 1 out of 100. 4 become wealthy. I think 56% are dependent upon the government or a pension to take care of them. And they start going downhill. So what I had to do, what I'm going to be talking to you about, is I had to watch my ideas. I had to watch what I said, and I had to watch who was giving me the ideas. Okay? Because they're not the same. Like you go to one doctor and they say, you know, eat a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. You go to another doctor, they say, eat a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. Somewhere you got to make your choice. Number two, the thing that I learned by having two dads with their contrasting points of view, I realized this really early on. I realized that money doesn't make you what? Rich. Because my poor dad made more money than my rich dad. So I think one of the biggest mistakes we've been going into is a lot of times people actually think if I win the lottery, you know, then I'll be rich. Or if I go to Vegas or gamble or my luck changes, then I'll be rich. It has nothing to do with it. Money is a very powerful tool, as my rich dad used to say. If you use it well, it'll make you richer. If you abuse it, it'll make you poor. So one of the big things that my poor dad made the mistake of saying, he always thought that if he got a pay raise, that would solve his money problems. And the trouble is, every time he got a pay raise, he got bigger problems. So it made him poorer and poorer the more money he made. Does that make sense, you guys? That was a very big problem with him. And then the third thing I realized by having two dads and having two contrasting points of view was that there's two kinds of money problems. One problem is not enough money. The other problem is too much money. And they're both problems. And the thing that I say to people is this, that, you know, like I think most people think they're real special. I'm the only one with money problems. Well, the reality is everybody has money problems. Everybody. Every single person. Every company has money problems. Every country has money problems. Every government has money problems. Everybody has a money problem. What makes you rich or poor or middle class is how you challenge or handle the problem. And what most people do, since, you know, so most of us came from families where the problem was too much or too little. Too little. And that becomes our idea. We think money is scarce, hard to get, work hard for it. Very popular idiom going around today suggesting that the way you get rich is cut up your credit cards. Oh. Live below your means. Those are poor people's mentalities. Save, you know, go long term, buy mutual funds. And it's not a rich person's way of thinking. I love my credit cards. They make me happy. You know, I drive, it says, drive a cheap car. I don't look good in a cheap car. I don't feel good. Now, the point I'm making here, again, there's poor, middle class, and rich. And very early on in my life, I really realized that being poor and struggling did not look good on my face. And I did not like it. But I grew up in a family that if you were rich, you know, the idea was that you were crooked, evil, not caring, inhuman, not generous, and all that stuff. So if I said I want to be rich, then I went against my family's values. You know, it was tough having that. Now, the other thing I saw was that by my rich dad managing his money well and becoming a business owner and an investor, that he got richer and richer and richer. Then he had a different kind of problem. His problem was too much money. And my rich dad said to me when I was about 18 or 19 years old, he said, son, there's two kinds of problems. Not enough or too much. Which one do you want? And at that point, does it make, you know, it's, and so I made an obvious choice. I said, I like the one with too much. You know, I like to listen and learn from my rich dad. The rest is history.
Well, let's go through some more of Robert's points about what he says. The rich teach their children that the poor and middle class do not. Main difference, you say, between the rich and poor lies in what we teach our children about
That's
money.
Correct.
Really?
Very much.
And it's a mentality. It's a total way of thinking, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's really easy to change if you're willing to change the way you think. For instance, my My poor dad was a very good man. For Japanese, he was 6'4", very smart, academic genius. But he always said to me, you know, go to school, get good grades, get a job and work hard, save money. And my rich dad said, well, if you want to be rich, that's not the way you do it. And instead of working for money, my rich dad taught me how to have money work hard for me. And that's why I've only had a job 4 years of my entire life. Other than that, either I'm building companies or I'm investing, and that's all I'm doing.
Well, the subject of money is taught at home, not in school, you say, because most of us learn about money from our parents, and it's only good if you have a rich dad mentality.
My message to people is, you know, why struggle for money when you don't have to? You know, it's that really simple if you have good advice. The problem is money is not taught in school. And so what we do is we oftentimes follow in our parents' footsteps. We may do different jobs, but we oftentimes follow in the same financial patterns. And my rich dad used to say, you know, he says, you can't end poverty by giving somebody money. Giving a poor person money keeps them poor longer.
Yeah.
And that's what breaks my heart, because I want to help people
change the way they think about money.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things is that I noticed between my rich dad and my poor dad was the vocabulary. My poor dad was a PhD in education, very smart man, but he had the vocabulary of a school teacher. And my rich dad had the vocabulary of a rich man. And so when I say to people, what's the first
What do you mean by vocabulary?
Well,
I know what the word means, but
right.
what kind of vocabulary?
Well, I used to sit around the dinner table and listen to both dads, and one would talk about algebra and geometry and trigonometry. Nothing of this ever made me any money. And my rich dad would sit there and he'd talk about return on investment, assets, liabilities, discounted cash flows, etc.
And a lot of people, you know, what you just said about your house is a liability, it's not an asset. Most people think it is their biggest investment.
Yes, and that's one of the biggest middle-class traps. They say, my banker says my house is an asset. And my rich dad would say, if you can read a financial statement, you'll see, you can read that your house is actually a liability. I'm not saying don't buy a house, and I like big houses, and I like the finer things of life. Just don't call a liability an asset. And what's trapping the middle class is they're buying liabilities they think are assets.
I like what you say in the book, but this is interesting too, because I've always been a person who lived beneath my means. Now it's kind of hard to see, you know, it doesn't matter. But I've always been a person who, because I just was reading about how the Chevy Chevette was the worst car, one of the worst cars ever made, and I had one of those little tin cans because that was the thing that I could pay cash for and not have to, you know, pay interest and so forth. So I've always believed in living beneath the means until you could really afford to pay for stuff, mainly because I hate bills. Just hate bills. And you say one of the mistakes that middle class and poor people do is they try to look rich. So those are the first people to go buy the furs, the diamonds, the big TVs, and all the stuff, correct?
Right. My rich dad called it looking good and going nowhere.
Love that. Yeah. My grandmother used to call